In this video, I want to talk about how you should approach the weekly homework in this course. And in particular, what I'm going to talk about is the workbook and the homework in WebAssign. So right now, I'm on the front page of the course in Canvas, and the place to find any and all homework assignments that are due is always the modules area. If I click modules, and then I go down to week one roadmap, because this is week one, the middle column always tells me everything that's due the following Sunday. So everything below this is due Sunday, January 15th. What I want to do though is talk about how all of this stuff ties together, because it's a list of tasks to do, and I think that depending on how you approach them, it can make more or less sense and be more or less useful to you. Each week, the bulk of the work that you'll have to do is completing 2 sections of the workbook and the corresponding WebAssign homework. Sometimes there will be other little assignments in there that I'll talk about when they show up. For instance, occasionally instead of written work, we'll have a mini project. And after each module, there's a module quiz to let you verify whether you have successfully learned what you need to learn from that module. But the bulk of your work is the workbook and the section-based WebAssign homework. And so I want to talk about that. And I actually want to look at section 1 too, because section 1.1 is a bit different. 1.1 being the introductory section doesn't have quite the same characteristics. 1.2 looks a lot like every section is going to look like. So let's suppose that I already did the first 3 bullet points here. Right, these are written approximately in the order that you should do them. And so let's say I'm done with all of 1.1 and I'm starting into 1.2. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to watch this video. This is an introductory video. I'll make one for each section, and I try to make them short. I try to make them not much longer than 5 minutes, and if possible, much shorter than that. And the goal is simply to introduce you to the point of the section. To say, what are we trying to do here? What is our big overall goal? This puts you in the right frame of mind to understand what questions are asking you. Now, that is, questions won't kind of come out of nowhere. You'll understand our general goals. The next thing you should do is you should go to the workbook and read the Getting Started section. And so for 1.2, this Getting Started section, it's going to list some learning goals, and then it's going to go over a bunch of the material that we need for the section. And when you read the Getting Started, some of it might make sense, some of it might be a bit confusing. It's not intended that it all makes sense right away. Sometimes you have to work through the homework for this to make sense. So you've watched the video I made. You've read through the Getting Started section, and now you're ready to complete the pre-activity. So the next part of the workbook is this pre-activity, and there's 2 ways to approach this. One option is just to do the pre-activity. It's self-contained in the workbook, so you could do this whole page of the workbook. And then you could go into WebAssign. So here I'm in the 254 homework 1.2. And if you read the instructions, which I always recommend doing, the first question refers to the pre-activity for 1.2. So what does this mean? Well, this first question here, if we look at question A, what kind of variable is temperature at launch? And then we flip back to the workbook. That's just the first question in the workbook. So the first question in your WebAssign homework is just the same thing as the pre-activity. And you can do the pre-activity in the workbook first and then enter your answers into WebAssign if you want. That's one approach. Another good approach, especially if you're unsure of your answers, is to do them side by side. That is, the whole point of having this in WebAssign is to give you immediate feedback as to whether your answers are right. And so you can just do them at the same time if that's what you want to do. The one thing you shouldn't try to do is do the WebAssign portion without doing the pre-activity in the workbook. Because if you look at the pre-activity in the workbook and you look at the WebAssign portion, what you'll realize is that the WebAssign portion is not really intended to contain all of the information. It's there to verify your answers, and so it's not particularly self-contained. It might be hard to do on its own. So that's the first point that you should notice, is that you want to do the first problem along with the pre-activity. All right, so if we go back to Canvas, we've watched our video, and read the getting started. And then we completed the pre-activity. And we also completed some of the WebAssign homework. The next thing we want to do is go to the activity in the workbook. So if we go to the activity in the workbook, we go down a bit further. In the workbook activity, we're again asked a bunch of questions. We're given a data set. We're asked what's the population of interest. We're asked some questions about the data. And what you should do with this is you should fill it out on your own, answer the questions. But again, if you want, you can do this alongside your WebAssign homework. So if we flip to WebAssign again and look back at our instructions, the second question refers to activity 1-2. So let's go to the second question. And again, this has the same sort of characteristic where you're not really expected to do this in WebAssign by itself. You're expected to follow along in the workbook. We're given a data set and we're given a bunch of questions about it. But if you follow these questions, you realize that they're actually the same questions as are in the activity, right? So here we have a question, circle all that are generally true. And then if we flip back to the WebAssign homework, again, number 4, the numbering will match up. Select all that apply. It's the same question. A few things about this. For one, you could approach it in the same 2 ways that you can approach the pre-activity. You can either just complete it in the workbook first and then enter your answers, or you can enter your answers as you work in the workbook. And I think either approach is reasonable, but getting that instant feedback can be nice so that you don't continue doing problems using kind of an incorrect understanding of things. It's nice to know that you did a problem wrong so that you can fix it. And then when you move to the next problem, you can just do that one right the first time. So some things you'll notice, we skip around, right? So we hop from 4 to 9. Why do we hop from 4 to 9? Because if you look at the workbook, question 5, for instance, asks you to make a frequency table and a histogram. That's not really something that I can quickly verify in WebAssign whether you did it correctly. So this problem won't contain everything from the workbook, but I do recommend that you fully complete the workbook. That is, that you go through the entire workbook and answer all of the questions, even if they aren't asked in WebAssign. Once you're done with this section, that is, once you're done with working through this workbook and getting all the way up to the extras and tips, the extras and tips, incidentally, is, even though it's at the end, can be useful to look at while you're working on each section. So you finish this section, right? You've gotten to 1-3. So we're done with that. And now what we'll do is we'll say, okay, well, there's still a bunch of questions in the homework. So we completed the activity, but we still have to finish homework 1-2. And so the rest of homework 1-2 in WebAssign is just a bunch more questions. So as we start flipping through here, we have to watch a video and answer some questions about it. We flip here again, we have to watch a video and answer some questions. As you move further, right here, we have to determine some medians. We have to do a bunch of things, right? So you'll complete this homework assignment, which kind of continues to reinforce what you've learned in the activity and provides you with more practice. And then if we go back here, the final thing that we have to do is each week you'll have to submit some written work. And if you were to click on this, it would tell you what to do. The assignment's not open yet, so I can't click on it. But when you click on the week 1 written work, it'll tell you to hand in pages 3 and 11 from the workbook. So if we go back to the workbook and look at pages 3 and 11, page 3 was actually from section 1-1. Usually I'll ask you to hand in a page or 2 from each section. So page 3 was this page from section 1-1. It was the first page. So you'll have completed that and you'll scan it. There's some instructions in the first written assignment for how to scan things. You'll scan this page and all of your work, and you'll also go to page 11. And that's this page where I ask you to make some graphs. You'll scan that work and you'll submit those into the week 1 written. And so this is generally the main thing that you have to do each week. There's often little other things, as I said, but you'll have to complete 2 activities, the pre-activity and the activity in the workbook, along with the questions in WebAssign. You'll have to complete those homeworks, and then I'll ask you to submit some of your work as written work. A few points I want to make about the workbook, or it's really one point with a few details, is that I don't ask you to hand in everything from the workbook. That is, as you saw in the homeworks in WebAssign, not every question has a corresponding WebAssign question, right? I skipped from 4 to 9. And similarly, I only asked you to hand in pages 3 and 11 to be graded by hand. So what about all those other pages? Like, what about, I don't know, if we go to page, for example, question 10 is a question that is neither asked about in WebAssign, nor do I ask you to hand it in to grade it. That is up to you, but I would recommend that you complete all of these problems. And it's for 2 reasons. One of the reasons is it's just good extra practice. Anything in the workbook that I don't tell you to avoid is worth doing. The second reason is that on exams and on quizzes, your main resource is your workbook. It's open note. You get to use your workbook. And if you've done a good job of organizing your work and answering all of these extra questions, when you come to sit down for the exams, which make up 60% of your grade, you're going to have a great resource. You're going to have all of this work that you've done, and you're going to succeed more than if you had skipped this stuff. So I highly recommend that you complete the workbook fully, even if I don't ask you about things. Because when there are questions in the workbook, this will occasionally happen, that there are questions that I don't really want you to spend too much time on. I'll tell you about it. So if you look at activity 1.1, I tell you, hey, don't worry much about questions 8, 9, 10, and 15. And in some sections, I'll say, hey, don't even do certain questions. So even though I don't ask you to answer everything in the workbook, unless I told you otherwise, unless I said, this is really not worth your time, it's not going to help you for this course, I highly recommend doing it. So as I said, there's other things that will show up in terms of homework, but hopefully this gives you a sense for how the workbook and the WebAssign tie together. I think it may take a few assignments for you to fully kind of catch on and to get your own sense of what's useful to you, how you want to approach it. But the big thing is to remember that those first 2 questions in WebAssign are connected to the workbook, and they're not self-contained. You really do need to use the workbook as you do those. So hopefully this was helpful. Good luck on the homework. And if you have questions about anything related to this video or that you encounter in the homework, remember the discussion board is a great place to ask those.